Travis. All right, folks, we're going to get started. It is 5:30. This is a business meeting of the North Kingstown School Committee. I'm going to call our meeting to order. If I could ask everyone to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Glassbach?
Here.
Ms. Hoskins? Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mrs. McGovern?
Here.
Ms. Stevens? Mrs. Schott?
Here.
And Student Representative?
Here.
Thank you. We do have 3 members present, so we have a quorum. This is not titled as a special meeting, but essentially is. We have only one item on our agenda, which is the North Kingstown High School Athletic Complex presentation. We're not going to be taking any votes on this item tonight, but we're here to hear the presentation, and then after the presentation we would take citizens' comments if people would like to speak. We do ask, we're not there yet, but there's a sign-up list at the back of the room if you'd like to speak at the microphone after the presentation. We do ask that you please limit your comments to 2 minutes when the time comes. So, folks, if you want to introduce yourselves, and we're ready to hear your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is David Pollack. I'm a managing engineer at Park Corporation, and worked in conjunction with Birchwood Design Group to prepare the presentation that we have in front of you today. We're expecting to have about we have an hour, 5:30, 6:30. We've got a 20-minute presentation, which will run through a number of items, and then we will have some time for questions afterwards. So, just to give you a rough framework, we will be starting with, I'll introduce, well, it's just me and Art Eddie from Birchwood Design. Okay. And then we'll run through, we kind of want to go through the site analysis and talk about what we've done to date. We have been working on this project for a little over a year, so there's been a lot of groundwork completed. So we'll just recap that quickly. We'll talk about the site improvements that are proposed, and then we'll delve into synthetic turf, which I know there's a lot of interest on. Talk about some options associated with it, and then finally we'll talk about costs. So, design team, Dave Potter. I'm Dave Potter from PAR, Arthur Eddy, principal at Birchwood Design Group. Our project engineer is Gary. He's not here tonight. That is our project landscape architect, Justin. But they've been involved in the project so far. So phase 1 consisted of doing some background investigation and facility assessment. We looked at the existing facilities. We performed field reviews. We looked at drainage requirements. We looked at what was whether water was flowing in the watershed from a civil standpoint. We did some limited subsurface investigations. A topographic survey was completed last summer, June, and there was also wetland investigation completed. After that, we took all the information that was derived from that investigation and we prepared a schematic design. We issued those documents for review, and we prepared a opinion of probable cost based on the proposed improvements. The next phase would be to jump into, we call it here phase 3, which would be development of construction documents and specifications for the program, for the field, which right now includes field, track, rehabilitation, some new throwing events, rehabilitating the practice field, which Art's going to jump into.
Good evening. Again, my name is Arthur Eddy. I'm a principal landscape architect of Birchwood Design Group. Just a little quick background on ourselves, too. We've worked on a series of athletic fields across New England, have been doing it for over 13 years. So we have a lot of experience. We're tied into the industry of what's happening, what's new. So we'll please at the end ask questions if you have them. We're more than willing to answer them. And just to start looking at your site, this is the high school site. Obviously, north is facing to the left. Most of your athletic fields are kind of in the southeast corner of your space. You're parking around the side and in the school. The project site that we're looking at is the track and field, the areas in the back. And you can see here the wetlands across the south of the property kind of constrain any expansion of those areas south. The project itself, looking at the track and field itself, we would be looking at the expansion of a new synthetic turf field inside the track, new synthetic track with D zones, relocating the jumping areas across the field, and then inside of that also looking at new throwing areas and rehabilitating the athletic field in that area. And by doing that, we're separating throwing events on that athletic field, kind of eliminating maintenance and issues with throwing events on athletic fields. The good thing is you have a sand cap field right now. When we use that sand cap field, when we take that material out, we can use that material to rehabilitate the field below and kind of remix that soil down there and make it a better draining soil and a better performing soil. What that could look like again, in this instance, again, right now you have what's called an IAAF track, which is the International Athletic Federation track, which means it's a little wider than it is longer. It's pretty typical. It allows you to have a bigger field inside of your track surfacing. When we go to replace the track right now, we're going to replace what's called the D zones. The D zones are exactly what they are. The D in the area at the ends of your track, between the end of your football field and inside the track. That allows you to hold jumping events and allows the function of a track meet to function better inside that area. Makes it a little more performance-based. Again, looking at the areas, moving shot put and separating those fields down below. And what that could look like, again, just a quick graphic image of what that facility could look like. Looking back at the field, what it can look like from the stands. Again, when you move into synthetic turf, there's a lot of options and a lot of things you can do with the field when it comes to logos, colors, and different types of turf, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So what are the benefits of synthetic turf? One of the big benefits of synthetic turf is when you build a synthetic turf field, it's actually hours of use. You can play on it longer, so you can start earlier. So in your rainy seasons, like last year when we had a really rainy spring, you can play on it in the rain, you can play on it after the rain, whereas you might be resting other fields. So you get on your fields earlier, and you can play on them later. And then you can also run them harder than you can a regular grass field, which means you only have a limited hour of use on a grass field. That limited hour use is 250 hours. You can really increase your hours. And so over a year, when you're looking at 2 seasons, you're looking between 625 hours for a natural grass field and 1,900 hours for a synthetic turf field. You're dramatically improving. And again, you have lights already, so you're really stretching that hours out so that that field gets used. So it's like building 3 fields in one. That's the real advantage. There is about a 33% reduction in maintenance, and the maintenance is on an escalating scale. Your first 4 or 5 years in, you're not going to do a lot of maintenance to the field, but that escalates over time. One of the things that we've been doing to try and avoid that and make your fields last longer and get more life out of them is actually building maintenance into the contracts so that you have somebody professionally looking at it at least once annually or biannually, coming back and fixing it. The other side of it is availability for all the multiple sports. One of the biggest things that we've seen is lacrosse has become a very popular sport. It is very damaging to fields because it's very aggressive in the goal box areas. This allows you to have multiple sports on that field and play with a lot of different sports. And that increases. There wasn't as much lacrosse, so a lot of kids were playing baseball and softball, and now those fields were getting rest, they're not getting rest. The other thing that happens when you have these fields, it allows you to utilize your other fields and let them rest. So use that field like a workhorse and a play field and allow your other fields to rest. And again, the biggest part of it too is demands on fields exceed supply of available land. In New England, we have very limited land on our sites. We have wetlands, we have boundaries. So when we look at that, building a synthetic turf field really gives you that kind of long-term gain. So when we look here, again, over 3 years, if you took 3 fields and with natural grass and replaced them over 10 years, every 10 years is kind of a typical turn, and then 10 years is typical for synthetic turf. You know, the cost is obviously more expensive for synthetic turf, and your initial investment is more expensive. Over time, because of a reduction in maintenance, you see that they start to even out. And we really look at the end of 30 years as kind of your return on investment when you start to match equal to equal on natural grass and a synthetic turf field. The difference is the hours of use. So if you did a cost analysis per hour, which I'll show you at the end, you're dramatically reducing your cost per hour of use. This is a quick slide that we've developed. There are a lot of infills, and infills are kind of a hot topic right now. Everybody's really concerned about SBR rubber and sand. There's a lot of conversations going about SBR rubber and sand. Again, when we look at the science behind it, there's nothing in the science that says there's anything wrong with it, but obviously we are looking at alternatives right now. And just to talk quickly about the alternatives, and we've started to evaluate all these alternatives and what we think works, and then also talk about what works for you and what kind of system you want to have. Again, the simple system is SBR sand and rubber. It's the cheapest. It does require maintenance because it does move around. It's the little black pellets that move around. You do have to go in and move around, but the maintenance is relatively limited. It's cheap to replace. TPE, which is a thermoplastic, and EPDM are raw virgin plastics. We've seen issues with TPE. It's really expensive. It's hard to get. There's Chinese TPEs, which have come in as toxic. EPDM breaks down. It doesn't hold. It's not stable in heat. But some of those like EPDMs work really well in certain climates. We've seen them work well up here, but they're more expensive. There's also what's called coconut and cork and corkonut, which are a mix of organics. And there's a mixes of both. Different manufacturers mix them together, make different products. Great field, really performs really, really well. High maintenance. Water, you need to irrigate it because it needs to hold its moisture content. You also need to replace it because as it gets hot and if you're not watering it, it breaks down faster. So there is associated maintenance and cost to that. And then there's also what's called a coated sand, which is a product that comes out of Texas. It's a round sand, and they coat it with a coating. It's one of the fields that we really like because what ends up happening is it's a really firm field, so it plays really, really fast. So the field and the ball roll really work well. And what we've found is when we put 2 or 3 of these in, we're putting another one in right now, that when you match it in testing to grass, it really comes close to performing with grass. The catch on the organics and the coated sand is once you take those away, again, the concussion conversation, you take away the compression of sand and rubber, right? The rubber is giving you your impact attenuation. Once you do that, you have to go to what is called a shock pad. So you put an underlayment shock pad that puts it underneath so that you takes the pressure and takes the impact attenuation. There are some advantages to the shock pad. The shock pad guarantees a Gmax of under 120 for 30 years on the pad. So that advantage, so Gmax, the way Gmax works is the higher the Gmax, the more danger it is. 200 is called critical, which is it's most likely going to be a critical injury could occur on that field. So as you come down. So comparatively, what does that mean? 175 is like a really good skin baseball infield, right? Kind of soft, but still pretty firm. So you're still talking about a pretty firm surface. So when you get down to 120, you're really in a good place. And with the EnviroFill, you're getting a good firm surface, but you're still getting Gmax and head injury criteria. When we look at head injury criteria is kind of a new criteria to the industry. It came out of the car industry and has come out of playground testing. And what we're really looking for is what's called a critical fall height. So how far does somebody have to drop before they have a critical injury? So you're looking at somewhere between 1.3 and 1.5 is really where you want to be. So we built this field recently in Medfield. It's been in for a year. We had testing done yesterday, and it was 1.4 on the critical fall height. The Gmax was 97. So if you test natural grass fields, critical fall height on natural grass fields is 1.5, 1.6. Gmax is anywhere from 70 to 90. So it's still kind of close in that range. You're getting a performance that's fast, but you're also getting something that's really close to natural grass. So again, we haven't decided on any of these materials yet. We've started talking about them. We have budgeted for them, so that we are looking at an alternative input. And then we got into turf. So I'm kind of backwards. Sorry, my slides are backwards. But turf itself. So there's a lot of different types of turf. There are now turfs that are, it's called a monofilament, which is a single strand that's weaved into, and it comes in and it looks like grass. We put a lot of it in. We ask for real dense. There's slit film, which is a basic slit that comes apart. So the difference between the two is slit film is a workhorse. You can run it, beat it, and it'll run and it'll last forever. It looks terrible. It looks terrible. So what they've done in the industry is combine the two into a monofilament, which is a hybrid, so you get monofilament and slit film. So they put the two together. So you're getting the workhorse, but you're also getting the look. What happens is, in the monofilament, it stands up more than the slit film. So what happens is that ball play for soccer, ball play for lacrosse, the monofilament performs a little better. The slit film lays down. So if you had a strictly football field, I would say go split film. Just because you can beat it up and work on it. If you're doing ball play where you're rolling the ball, you kind of want that monofilament to help it perform better. And you can see that across the board. And again, putting this all together, when we looked at costing for the field itself, and when you look at the synthetic turf numbers in here, understand that that includes maintenance. Currently, we're carrying it in the number. It carries things like logos. It carries things like different colored turfs. Those numbers are in the minutia of the turf numbers, but the total project ends up about $2.4 million. That includes the field down below, all those replacements, building the shot put, new discus hammer cage.
Contingency.
Right, contingency. There's built-in contingencies. There's built-in bonds and overhead profit for the general contractor. And then the field itself, replacing the track, and I didn't talk much about the track, but the track needs to be completely replaced. We're not going to, we can leave the asphalt. So it's not as bad as it sounds. They'll scrape up the track and lay down a whole new surface. And the reason for that is, and like anything, when you relay a track surface over time, you have to replace them. So that, again, they should be sprayed every 8 years, and you can do that 3 times. Once you get beyond that, you start to lock up the system, and you're putting down too much spray, and the whole system locks up, and then what you end up with is settlement underneath, and the track starts to fall apart. So that would need to be scraped up and replaced. And then lastly, this is the kind of overall cost per hour. The yellow line is looking at hours per use for synthetic turf, and then hours of use in the green. So you can see both have kind of an initial investment, which is the synthetic turf has a fairly substantial initial investment. Once you go back, if it's built correctly, you should be able to go in and pull the turf up in your next cycle, which would be somewhere between 10 and 12 years. Take out the turf, do a little bit of work, and then put the turf back down. So your cost of investment is a little significant, and that's where you start to really make up the gap on the cost to use per hour over those 30 years. And again, at the end of 30 years, you're kind of break even on those costs per use, and what you're getting, those costs per hours are significantly different. You're looking at big gaps in your cost per hours of hundreds of dollars on your first use. That's all I have. Questions? Yeah.
So on the 10-year maintenance for turf, what order of magnitude for the
Synthetic turf?
repair cost? Yeah.
So synthetic turf, we usually carry, and again, it depends on, there's some things that matter that you depend on decisions early on. If you decide to put all your lines in the field permanently, you take some paint cost out, right? But if you put your lines in permanently, one of the concerns I have is currently the NCAA is having conversations about the rules of lacrosse, and I think they're going to change. So you put your lines in permanent, now you got to take those lines out and then change them. So we've been painting a lot of lacrosse fields, so you got to paint. So somewhere between, we look at somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000 a year. But again, that's an escalating cost. What we see is those first 4 or 5 years, really you're doing grooming, some minor grooming on the field. When you get down to like 8, 9, 10, you're going to have to start like replacing lacrosse circles because they're just worn out. And that obviously escalates over time. So your maintenance costs are weighted. So we say between 5 or 10 years, but that's over the life of the project. So you're looking up at $50,000 over the life of the project, but it's back end loaded. So just you try to keep that in mind.
And the permanent lines, can you put permanent lines on a field that's used for football, soccer, lacrosse, and track and field?
Yep. We do it all the time. The kids don't know any different. If you go to some places like, I'll give you an example. There's Four Kicks in Taunton, which is like a soccer kind of mecca place. There are so many lines on that field. It's mind-boggling. But the kids kind of figure it out and know what to do. So, again, I think you would be looking at like 5 or 6 sport lines. It's not a big deal. What we try to do is, one of the things that happens is there's 2 ways that lines go in the field, right? When they manufacture the product, they do what's called tufting. So the fiber is tufted into the backing. They can stop the machine and tuft a white line, a yellow line, but they can only do that on a long run. So your side lines, your end lines, your 5-yard lines, your 10-yard lines, those all can be tufted, and they can be tufted for every sport. Once you get into the like soccer arc, they actually have to cut that. It's called an inlay. So they cut it out and then glue it down. So you're gluing turf to the backing to the backing. It's done all the time, but it also fails, right? So in your warranty, there's an 8-year warranty on the life of the turf. They only come back and repairing that. So, and it'll happen. I always get a phone call. It's panic. This is happening. And the repairs happen. It's something you kind of expect. The good thing is, in this area, there's a lot of turf installers, so response time is really fast. And like Lincoln, just last Friday, 2 Fridays ago, they had a slight tear in their logo, and the guy was there at 10 o'clock the next day. It was repaired, and they played. It was Thursday, and they were playing Friday night. So, but those are things you kind of try to balance and make decisions on. You know, I know that in the past, I can tell you, we did field hockey made a rule change in our lines. And we had to go back to all our fields and rip out, put in new lines because field hockey changed. And that's my biggest concern about lacrosse. I see rule changes coming.
And when a permanent line fails, or a cut-in line fails, is there any danger to the athletes?
I mean, it depends on the severity of the failure. Normally we're talking about like a corner pulling up. It's not usually a big deal. If you have a fail, which we wouldn't assume would happen, yeah, that can be dangerous.
Have you ever seen that?
I have seen the failures I've seen are at the edges, not in the field of play. And so, you know, a lot of fields, you're racing to the end. It's cool. They're gluing. It's a little moist out. They shouldn't be gluing. You know, all those things is watching them and making sure they're doing those things right. At the end of the day, it's not the end of the world. They just have to come back and fix it. But I haven't seen big failures, like big rips failures. Nothing that we've done.
Questions?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming and giving the presentation. When you talk about approximately getting 10 to 12 years for the plate, so you said you pull it up, do some stuff, put it back. Are you putting back the same turf, or are you putting back different turf?
I can't. I wouldn't know that at this point, right? I mean, 10 years ago, we weren't putting pads down, and I pretty much won't do a field without pads. So that whole industry, right? So 10 years ago, we were doing a really deep 2.5-inch turf, sand and rubber up. So it was really a lot of sand and rubber, really getting that G-Max. You know, what we found over time was a lot of movement. And we were going back to fields 8 years later, and, you know, I live in North Smithfield. I went to the lacrosse circle. There was no way to fill it. And I was like, all right, somebody's got But that all changed, so in 10 years, I can't, you're gonna replace it with a synthetic turf?
Right,
But
I guess my
it might be
my
different.
point being is, depending on what you pick, like, different disposal cost differences, or,
So,
I mean, because one of my concerns is, you know, you're right, you pay the hours for thing you get, but then, you know, you get to year 10 and go, I gotta replace it, right? And you wanna be budgeting for the replacement as you go along too, on
yeah,
that.
absolutely. And that's one of the things that we talk about, is making sure that as you're going through the 10 years, your rentals, your use, there's use fees, and you're collecting your money. And I will give you a prime example. I live in the town of North Smithfield. They put it in the general fund, and there is no money there. So now what do you do? You know, there's 100,000. Well, it's not. It's like 350,000 to replace it. So now what do you do? And we've talked extensively about how you budget for this, how you prepare for it, separating those costs in the fund to make sure that you can do that. I've seen worse, like when we did Medfield, they wanted to do a replacement, and it was built really poorly. Like, it had a wood nailer around the edges, it was failing where I could put my hand down and reach down to the drainage structure, the stone was really bad, and we had to rebuild the entire thing. I did Whitman Hanson this year. We went in, pulled out the rug, did a little bit of grading, put down a hole in the field. It was $400,000, and they opted for a $15,000 logo. They put shadows on the numbers. They were like, wow, they budgeted $400,000. We were under that, and they bought a lot of stuff, and they bought maintenance at the end for 8 years. The thing that we're seeing, the maintenance makes the big difference in the longevity of getting that field to stay. And I think in the past, like 10 years ago, it was sold as a no maintenance field, and it's not. I don't want to make it sound like it's not. You do have to do maintenance on it, especially your high use areas. You know, your corner kicks, your goalie boxes. You do need to push infield around it and make sure that it's leveled up.
And so the 2.4 million in your cost estimate, that's projecting at the most expensive turf, or?
No, it's kind of the middle range,
Okay.
right? You know, it's kind of the middle range of the turf. It's kind of not the cheapest. It's not the most expensive. It's kind of the middle range of the turf. And we could certainly look at the high end, but I don't think you're going to get more out of it than you want to. And you're not.
So the 2.4 would be the turf and the fill you recommend as the best for the site.
Right.
Balancing all the considerations.
Yeah, kind of at the high school level, and the thing about the high school level, right? So if you looked at all the high level athletic facilities, let's use the Patriots. They're ripping their turf out every 20 years. They're not going to keep it for 10 or try and get as many years out of it as they can. They're not going to do that. We're trying to get you the longevity, the use, make sure you can meet all your needs for all your sports. Not just one sport. So that we find that kind of balance in that system, and then balance safety, right? Like we really feel like the field gives you a level of safety in that field that, again, we're taking that SBR rubber where that rubber was moving, and now the G-Maxes were dropping rapidly over time, and putting it in there and guaranteeing that 120. So there's things in there that we're really trying to balance cost, safety, use, and performance, and try and get the best field that kind of matches up with.
Two other things. So I know in the cost there are accessory stuff like you talked about. So and then there's equipment and some packages and that stuff. Is there anything for the rest of the complex, like the restrooms and the press box and that kind of stuff?
No.
We should do it right so we can maximize rental use and stuff.
Well, I think that, it's kind of an early discussion for that, but I think we need to really talk about the expectation on the rental as well. Mr. Fossa, our new AD, I don't know how much longer I can call you that, but I will stretch it out as far as I can. We've discussed the rental, and I think we do need to discuss that. We need to put some reality around that and not be expecting millions of dollars in here because Or we need to set the expectations, let me say that, because the expectation from our end is that the fields are going to be used by our students and our teams. So I think looking at schedules and looking at what we're expecting, if we're expecting anything from the middle school as well, we need to not be thinking we're going to be getting in tons of money unless the expectation is different. So I think we need to temper that right now and discuss that further at a later date.
There are only so many hours in a day.
That is correct, and if we're looking, if we want to say that we're going to cut off certain teams or whatever we're going to do so we can get revenue, that needs to be a decision of the school committee. But as Mr. Fossa and I have discussed also with Dr. Ajay, looking at the schedules that we have right now, we see kind of limited rental ability, especially because we're going to bring in some more middle school use, and so I just think we need to be careful with that and talk about that further as what the expectation is on that.
And some of our early review kind of showed that, right? I mean, your fields are heavily used.
Right.
They're really getting a lot of use out of them right now. And you have your main field is a sandcat field, which is like the Cadillac of grass fields. The problem with the Cadillac of grass fields is it is super high maintenance. It's like one of the most intensive fields. Great field, but it just requires a lot of attention.
And so based on your analysis, and talking about like the wetlands and other stuff, so you wouldn't, to the extent you can say so, you wouldn't expect any surprises once we go forward in terms of, like, I don't quite know the story, but I know East Greenwich started doing something and then took a whole year or something. I don't know the context, but I know they got surprised by something.
Yeah, no, I can't predict everything.
That's the
Right?
definition of a
We
surprise.
pull up the ground.
It really is a surprise.
Reasonably,
no surprise.
I mean, from a reasonable aspect of, getting the right contractor, getting the field built on time, on schedule. Our tracker will show that we do that pretty regularly. The biggest, and I'll say it over and over again, the biggest catch is the track. Right? With the track, there's only, I want to say there's only 2 or 3 contractors that can do it. So you're at their mercy. And everybody who's building a track, everybody who's spraying a track wants to dump out. So you're kind of at their mercy. That's the biggest one I could see.
So that sort of my last question is, so that point aside, let's just say you can do that, is from when whatever constitutes green lighting, how long would it take, and what would you say should be, like, ideally you should start here, obviously to complete for the
Sure.
fall season?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we recommend is that you can get the bid market in January. You're most likely going to get the best pricing. Right? Because contractors are starting to line up their projects for the year. At that point, they're coming out of winter. They all take winter off December, January, and they're coming out January, kind of starting to build their portfolio. They really can't start until March, April, depending on weather. But nobody wants to give up a season on a field. So the recommendation is the day you're off it, you let them take it over at that point, which tends to be June 15th. And then it's the race. We try to get them to hit September 1st. But it's always a race. There's always decisions that need to be made based on whatever. And we'll work through that at the end. Perfect example is Lincoln. At the end of we hit August, and the track guy was behind, couldn't come, and they decided we're not going to do the track this year because we want to play on the field and use it, and then we'll spray it next year. So you have to balance those decisions. In Medfield, they said, we want it done. We finished on September 1st. They played on it 2 weeks. They came off. We built the track in 2 weeks, and then they went back on. So there's a little bit of juggling there, and it's usually the track guy that kind of controls that when it's going to finish. The turf, June to August, it's just, it's about 14 weeks.
Thank you.
One other thing to Mr. Jones's question, can you talk a little bit about what you have done pre-work with DEM and any of that? Because, David, I know you have done some of that, so that might help part of Mr. Jones's question as well on the surprise.
Yeah, we worked with DM to permit a number of fields in Rhode Island, and they're becoming more and more familiar with these systems. When they first started seeing them, it was kind of unknown. They were working through how do they look at it for stormwater management. That was really their biggest concern. Was this like a parking lot, or is this like a grass field? It's kind of neither. And we've been working with DM extensively over a number of projects to come to an understanding of how these systems are actually operating when a rain event does occur, and how to address the principles in and around stormwater management standards. Water quality, recharge, and making sure there's no increase in peak flow leaving the site. Those are the major issues you see with these fields, or the major concerns that need to be addressed. And we have strategies to tackle all those. We have, under the system, we never get to talk about drainage because nobody gets to see it, but it's my thing, so I'll give a little bit of detail there. There is obviously it's a porous system. Rainfall goes straight through. You'll have a series of flat drains, typically laid out in a herringbone style, that will take the runoff and bring it to manifolds, just long pipes connected at the ends of the outside edges of the track, edges of the field. And that'll convey everything to eventually to your drainage outfall. And we upsize those pipes a little bit to hold the water back a little. I don't want to make it sound like a detention basin. It's not going to fill up with water, above the field, but it'll hold it back enough to balance DEM's concerns with the installation with the field. So, they're used to seeing that now, and they've come a long way, I think, working together with them.
So along the discussion about rental revenue, does field use affect life cycle cost? Like the more intense use, would you have to do maintenance sooner? And if you have less use, would you extend the life?
Yeah, and as soon as you start to cross the threshold of hours, which is like 800 hours, it starts to break down faster. We haven't really seen that. The only place I've seen it is Marshfield High School in Marshfield, Mass. And they're on that field from 9 to 11 o'clock every day. And so what we're seeing there is not so much a breakdown in fiber, more of a breakdown in the infill. And not the infill's breaking down, it's moving a lot because they're playing on it so much. So that attention, you need more attention if you're putting hours. Most high schools, we don't see that kind of extended use where it's during the day it's gym class, which is light use. So it's not getting as much expensive. Marshfield uses it all day long. It's the only field they have in town. So it's also all our rec leagues, all our adult leagues, everybody plays there. So that's the one that I've seen. The infill is, and there's, I don't know how to put it, but there's a political battle between the school committee and DPW, because DPW maintains it, the school committee, and they're arguing back and forth. So there's also a little bit of a political strife there. And that's just that. So. But again, I haven't really seen where it's been overused so much. I've seen fields, we're kind of getting into the second cycle of replacement, which is, we're like 16 years, a lot of the synthetic turf fields are going in. And we're finding out a ton of stuff over these replacements. The backings aren't breaking down at all. They're really holding together. Which is good. It means the turf's not shredding. What we're seeing is there were fiber issues back a while ago, and you can go find and read about them. There was a breakdown in the materials that were in the fibers. We're not seeing that anymore. The fibers are getting better. They're adding carbon to it. We're just seeing a lot of things. And the other thing that's happening in the industry, huge amounts of testing. Like we're demanding huge amounts of testing. So in the past, we wouldn't ask the manufacturer to send us their samples off their rolls when they built it. Now we can get a sample and the testing off of every roll. So when it shows up on site, I know exactly what it is, that it matches, and that we're getting the same thing. So the industry's changed a lot. And I think in the past, people weren't testing their fields. So part of that maintenance every year is also testing it. To understand, we do need to groom over, we do need to do this, and those things weren't happening. We go to a lot of sites, the grooming equipment comes with it. There's training, they teach you how to use it. I've gone to sites and the grooming equipment's still in the box, and it's 8 years later. And so your field's not going to last if your grooming equipment's still in the box. it needs attention. So making sure that everybody's educated and understands it is really the most important part, and I think that part of the industry has changed a lot.
And who does the testing?
So we do third-party testing. We do a lot of different testing. So we do third-party testing on all HIC, GMAX, on infield depths, on rotational. So if you plant your foot and you rotate, what does that look like? Vertical deformation, which is if you drop, does it bounce back? What is that restitution? Because that equals lower leg extremities. That kind of, you run on a synthetic turf field, you feel exhausted. Test for that. That's all third-party. The testing, we ask the manufacturers to test their stuff coming out, and if we don't believe we're getting what they say we're getting, we'll go third-party test it and send it out to a third-party test, and it'll review it and tell us what it is. And we've done that before to make sure that we're getting the same system across the board, so that you don't have, they come in 15-foot rolls, so when you roll it out, you make sure we're not getting different rolls. We test all that stuff. We'll test depths. We'll do our own tests on depths. We'll do our own tests on infield depths. We'll do our own tests. We kind of look at all that stuff. It's a lot different than it used to be.
And are the testing costs included in the life cycle cost estimate?
The initial testing is definitely included. If you choose to do the maintenance, which we highly recommend and we have included in these costs, that testing comes with it as well. That testing is part of that annual grooming, testing, and making sure all those things are complete. And we don't let the manufacturers test. We let the third-party test. So even in that manufacturer, the manufacturer is providing the maintenance, they're also getting a third-party test on the testing that they provide during that.
Do we have any of those test results? Like, can you share any of the due diligence reviews that you can
Sure. You'd be happy to send them along. And again, we also, so the other piece is like certain pad manufacturers also provide testing. We monitor fields all the time. I'd be happy to share any of that information. I can show you the information on the track too, because the track is very much the same. And what we've started doing recently is in construction process, you get submittals, this is what you're getting. We ask that for it in the bid now. So we're asking for full submittals in the bid so that we know exactly what we're getting. We're asking for the testing in the bid so that even prior to them walking in the door, that we know they have all that information. So it's much more intensive than what we've had. But yeah, I'd be happy to share that information.
Sorry.
That's what we're here for.
Where is the nearest field that resembles the one you would recommend?
Medfield.
Medfield?
Yeah. There's 6 in Massachusetts. There's 6 in Massachusetts, and I can tell you the 6, they're all different. They're all different designers, but they're all different. And some of it is kind of figuring out that kind of what is the right mix. And we spent a lot of time working with the coated sand manufacturers specifically to figure out what that is, and we think we have a pretty good mix at this point. So Medfield is, and I'd be happy to give you them as a reference if you want to see it. They love showing it off. They're really proud of it. They love the field. So there's one in Newburyport, the one we're building right now, and then Beverly. So it's really up north. So if you want to see fields, I'd be happy to show you different fields, different infills. All those things are.
Thank you very much. Sure, yeah.
So I just want to acknowledge David and Art and the other 2 members of the team that weren't here. I also want to acknowledge Dick Fossa because he assisted with this. We've been meeting with them, and also Howie Haig because we started this back in April when they did their first phase 1 and phase 2. And Andrew Shagman, who was part of PAR, who's moved to a different agency, but he was also part of phase 1 and phase 2 also when we were looking at all of this. So it's really good for us that they have, like Art was saying, the 13 years of experience because, they've learned a lot as they've gone along. So that's beneficial to us, you know, that we know the good and the bad and all that they've learned along the way. So I thank them very much for their time and effort along with this.
Thank you. Dr. Shea?
I just also want to thank parents who are here this evening. It means a lot. And, you know, over the next few months, weeks and months, we're going to be looking at, I think there's consensus here that, you know, the committee wants this to happen. I think our town council wants something like this to happen too. Tough question is finding the means to pay for it. And there's discussion of possible bonding going on. But I just want people to be aware. That's the next part of this discussion. And hopefully we could meet a timeline. This is, you know, a rough estimate, and a lot depends on a lot of different things. But I'm hoping that by the summer of 2019, we could be doing some installing of something along the lines that was presented here tonight. I think that's an important part of it, that people need to know the context.
So this isn't something that, you know, is going to be in for next fall, and it's a lot of discussions. We'll have to, a lot of work on our end, working with the council and coming up with, you know, it's not a small number. There are a lot of needs of the district, and so we need to figure out what's feasible and how we can make that happen. So if there aren't any more questions, the next item on the agenda are citizens' comments. If anyone's signed up to speak. Either of you have any questions? I'll put you on the spot. No? Just a quick note on citizens' comments. We ask, do we say 2 or 3 minutes? I forget. 3. Sorry, I said 2 before, and it's 3. If I could ask people to limit their comments to 3 minutes per our policy, and just to note that we're not able to have a back and forth question and answer. So if you have questions, you know, you can certainly state them, and we can see if we can get someone to answer any questions for you. So the only person who signed up is Jeff Wadovic. If you could please come to the microphone, state your name and address.
Good evening, members of the school committee and Dr. O'Shea. My name is Jeff Wadovic. I'm 76 Mesa Drive here in North Kingstown. I am an active member of the North Kingstown High School Booster Club and on my 3rd rotation on the audit committee for the town of North Kingstown. I am a CPA and I practice here. I just have a couple questions that I'd like the school committee to consider. I was wondering if the budget, when it gets presented, that we could see a breakdown between phases, perhaps seeing a track and field phase versus all other phases. I also have questions because I saw the original budget of $2 million and it's now grown to $2.4 million. And that original budget did include tennis court activities, which I believe have been taken care of. So I'm just curious as to what the increase represents. Because right now that's a 20% increase over the previous budget. And that does not include excluding the tennis courts. And I do have other questions, but at this point in time, I will hold off on those questions.
Okay, well, thank you. Anyone else like to speak?
I didn't sign up.
Oh, yeah, if you didn't sign up, if you want to come to the microphone, if you could limit your time to 3 minutes, please, state your name and address.
Tricia Poirier, Booster Club President, 108 Misty Meadow Lane. Also parent, been around for 9 years on the Booster Club. We've been talking about this since I started. I think everybody on the Booster Club would like to see it happen. I think there is room for us to have more communication between the groups. and just, we'd like to help, not under the guise of the Booster Club, but as a community group. I think we need to get the word out. Everybody's for it. Everybody wants it. And we'd like to see it happen. We'd like to help. So, that's it.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Anyone else who might not have signed up but would like to speak? Okay, if not, we've reached the end of our agenda, so I'd ask for a motion to adjourn. Do a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. We're adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you. CT High Advice?